What if the key to better health for Pacific peoples was never in a pill or a diet plan? What if it was really in the food our ancestors grew, cooked, and shared for thousands of years? I've spent years researching how culture, diet, and genetics shape metabolic health in Samoan women, and what the science keeps showing me is that our traditional foods weren't just cultural, they were protective. And this knowledge is going to be incredibly empowering for those of us on our health journey. In this episode, I'm breaking down what the research actually says, the food, the genetics, the history, and why going back to what we already knew might be the most powerful health intervention that we actually have. Talo, and welcome to the Samoan Scientist Podcast. My name is Amy Maslen-Miller and I am your host. I'm a PhD candidate and have been spending 4 years researching the Samoan traditional diet, and we're also live here on TikTok, who we have some fans on here who also have the opportunity to ask questions as we go through this episode today. So first of all, I really wanted to start with our traditional foods. Because my PhD has looked at the Samoan traditional diet, that's what I know. But generally across the Pacific, we see these traditional foods. So my work has looked at the written literature and trying to understand what did our ancestors eat, because we have that hypothesis that our ancestors were very healthy in the 1800s before colonisation. They were active, and there were really no metabolic diseases like type 2 diabetes. And so I looked at all the literature and I found that a lot of our everyday foods were taro, breadfruit, yam, coconut, banana, and seafood. So these 6 foods were eaten generally for breakfast and dinner. They were food from the land and the sea. They were fresh, whole processed foods, high carbohydrate, yes, but no added sugar or preservatives. And our people were extremely active, even to maintain a plantation of galo or crops. Even to grow yams. Yams are extremely difficult to grow, and they take a long time to grow as well. That takes a lot of energy. That takes a lot of knowledge. And so in the 1800s, our Samoan ancestors had no choice but to live off the land and the sea, where taro, breadfruit, yam, coconut, banana, and seafood were their main foods. Those of you in the live, feel free to jump in and ask questions. If you have any, I'm happy to answer them as we go along. So when we trying to paint the picture of what our ancestors ate, we also want to ask, how were they cooking these foods? And predominantly all the food was cooked in the umu. The umu is a traditional earth oven where these river rocks are heated, and then food is placed on top of them. And then the food is then wrapped into banana and breadfruit leaves. And then the food is essentially, we'd call it baked, and it can get extremely hot in the middle of that umu, the traditional earth oven. And what we'd cook in there is the foods that I talked about. So the taro, breadfruit, yam, coconuts, bananas, different types of seafoods. This is what we would traditionally have, like those are our everyday foods. I wanted to talk about these foods because we see when we look at our ancestors, they ate really healthy and they lived with the land and sea and were extremely active. And potentially using some of that knowledge today could be life-changing for some of us. So when we look at the science of these foods, which I'll talk about later on, they are extremely protective of metabolic diseases, of the things that we see nowadays. And so my thesis and my whole work is really a advocation for looking at our ancestral foods as another option in terms of healthy eating. Yes, we had those everyday foods, but there was interesting preservation techniques that I came across in the literature. So we had these pits called masi pits. Masi is biscuit, but actually I believe they call them masi pits because the end product looks like a biscuit. So these masi pits would be filled of breadfruit. They would generally peel the skin of the breadfruit and place them into a deep pit. The deep pit would be lined with breadfruit leaves, banana leaves, and then the breadfruit would be placed into the pit and then covered with banana leaves and then topped with dirt. Some villagers would leave that pit maybe for 6 months, some for a year. And then once they were ready to eat that food, they would uncover it and would have a really cheesy sort of smell. Not very nice apparently. But then they would get a bit of that fermented breadfruit and then shape it into like a loaf of bread, and then they'd cook it in the umu. And so they said that these types of foods would then be used for sea voyages because they could last up to, many months as they're traveling along the seas. So we have, preservation techniques. We have incredible dependency on the food from the land and the sea. We have a very innovative way of cooking food, and also a lot of the plants around us at the time in the 1800s were a form of medicine. And even now in Samoa, there's a rich history of for people who use medicinal plants to help with ailments and health conditions. And so when we look at all this evidence of kind of the knowledge of our ancestors, they truly, were scientists of their time. What was the main foods you noticed prevalent in their diets back in the 1800s? I would say definitely that high carbohydrate. So the taro, the breadfruit, the yam, coconut, banana, seafood, they were the main foods during that time. But I will mention that there were also ceremonial foods, and these actually consisted of pigs, turtles, sharks, and bonitos, which is like a large fish. And these were only kept for special ceremonies, and only eaten very rarely because they took a lot of energy to, grow the pig nice and large. Even to catch a shark or even to catch a turtle took a lot of energy. And when these animals would be used, they would then be cooked and then divided into certain sections and given to chief based on their ranking. So high chiefs would have the higher part of, for instance, like the pig. The pig would be divided like the head, the loins, the rump. I believe the head was given to the tulafale, which is the talking chief. And so there was a real structure and protocol around how these ceremony foods were respected, how they were served, and who they were given to really show, I guess, that respect for the animal, but also respect for our Samoan structure. There's another question here. What factors have shaped why our people have changed their diets and lifestyle compared to our ancestors? Such a good question. So we see, our ancestors living off the land, pre-colonization. We see them thriving. But also during this time, we have other navigators in the Pacific visiting other islands. And there have been documentations of, I believe, French explorers sailing past Samoa, and people would paddle out in their canoes to these big European ships, and they would trade. They would trade items with people of Samoa and the people in the Western boats. And included in those trades were food. So that was also I guess, the Pacific's exposure to tinned food, tinned canned food, cabin bread as well. And as we go forward in history, we get the influence of colonisation, where we had the missionaries coming to Samoa, for instance, and they too bringing their own foods with them. We then see the influence of urbanization. You see in Samoa now, a lot of people are moving, into the city because that's where all the work is. And city jobs generally have office jobs, so people aren't as active. We see also the influence of, for instance, in Samoa, we were once under German rule. So we really see the Germans influencing our perspectives around food, really utilizing our food as a cash crop industry, and shifting our thoughts away from food for our family and for our health, but more towards we can make money off of this food. And so it's a complicated combination of time, colonization, urbanization, import and export policies that we see now a shift away from our ancestral diet to today, where we can get an Uber and get our food sent to us. We can go through the drive-through. We have so many options nowadays. We can get any type of food, takeaways, Chinese, Indian, Mediterranean food, Vietnamese food. And we also think of our societal structures now. We need to survive. In order to survive, we need to make a living. We need to make a career. We need to make money. And so what it means to be human and to operate as a human is very different now compared to back in the 1800s, where we lived for our families and we lived off the land, and we really lived within our village and our culture. So, just as I was talking in the chat, please feel free to ask any questions as I'm going along. Thank you. I see mostly economics. Cost does bring convenience, I suppose. Yeah, good point as well. So I also wanted to talk about just the really amazing kind of perspective of our ancestors, where they had a really in-depth understanding on the environment. So we actually had in Samoa a food calendar. The closest one I could find, it does follow the Gregorian calendar, but as it follows the Gregorian calendar, it also relates it to different seasons for crops. So the months are generally named after crops, and I made a seasonal calendar just to remind myself of the different Samoan seasons. So for instance, Januari, which is January, is known as the Utuvamoa, which is the first yam digging season. So the mythology or the tale goes that Utuvamoa and Utuvamuli were two brothers who fled to earth during a war in heaven after their side was defeated. So they brought the January storms with them. Utuvamoa the elder and Utuvamuli the younger one later escaped back to the heavens during a great war on earth. And so Vai to Ilau, also known as the northeasterly wind season, so it's generally back at that time kind of a windy season, and the hills are said to be the mounds of the slain covered by earth dug from the valleys. When the brothers look down upon these scenes, their sorrow and rage causes the storms and hurricanes, and so that is why they believe that January is generally a northeasterly wind season. And so we have all this knowledge for the different months, and I don't think a lot of that has been documented. Do you have any kids' Kai lunchbox recipes or suggestion towards decolonizing a baby's guts? Oh, that's a good one. I haven't had that question before. It really depends what you have access to as well. I know here in New Zealand, you can make some like yummy taro, coconut cream recipes, even with bananas. The green bananas, you can boil them up. Anything, I guess, with coconut is really good as well. Kids generally like to have coconut cream, even some coconut water. You can also try, when it comes to Samoan foods, like everyone will have a different perspective of what traditional means. But when I talk about traditional foods, I'm talking about the whole processed foods that our ancestors had access to in the 1800s. So it's going to be taro, breadfruit, yam, coconut, banana, and fish. So any of these foods you can try with different variations of them. You can put a spin on it, like a stir fry, have a bit of taro in there, or a bit of yam if you can get your hands on it. Breadfruit, you can actually use that breadfruit flour as like a substitute for making cakes. So you could try that as well. Let me know how that goes, because I'll be really interested to see what the kids like, because it really depends as well, kind of what your child likes, and just slowly introducing that food. When we looking at yes, that's what I wanted to talk about as well. When it comes to our foods, I got another question. Do you know what was the average lifespan of our ancestors following our traditional diet? Do you know what the average lifespan of our ancestors following our traditional diet? Oh, so back then, unfortunately, people did die a lot younger, because they more died of kind of diseases that we have cures for today, like skin diseases, tuberculosis, and things like that. So unfortunately, they died of other things. But I believe that within the research, we see that a lot of this, our traditional foods are protective of things like type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular diseases. The science is there. The science says these foods, especially taro, coconut cream, breadfruit, banana, a lot of work in banana, shows that individually these foods are extremely good for us, and particularly for those who already have diabetes or have problems with their glucose levels. And so, where is that question? And so, yeah, through my work, I see that our traditional diet is extremely healthy for us. Is it true that we have a fat storing gene? Is this part of the reason why we tend to be bigger? This is a really good question. So when it comes to our genes, genes make up our DNA. So we know kind of our DNA based on our family members. That's how our DNA is passed on. But actually within our DNA, we have these things called genes, and they can code for eye color, hair color, and that's what makes us all slightly different, because we have these different sets of genes. And what we find in the research is that for us Pacifica, we have some really interesting genes that actually relate to our body composition and our metabolism. And you may hear of this narrative that we have a gene that allows us to store fat, and came about because we used to travel across the Pacific Ocean and looking, for our new home, our Pacific Islands. But there's, I believe that theory is very inaccurate and not true. The research that was carried out on this fat storing gene was developed on by a very theoretical hypothesis that was not from our Pacific perspective. And then when we see this gene, that fat storing gene that you're talking about, there's also very inaccurate analysis of this gene. And so, unfortunately, we have this narrative as Polynesians that people believe that we are fatter because of our genetics, which is extremely far from the truth. What I do want to say is that I don't want us believing in that narrative that was not even scientifically or accurately researched and was not carried out with us in mind. It was more for others to be the first to identify these genes and to make a career by othering us. And I want people to know that there's recent research being done that we actually have found, actually a team in America have found that there's a gene called CREBRF, that is protective of type 2 diabetes. That if you have that gene, you're less likely to get type 2 diabetes. And what an amazing narrative to have for our people, because we really are very much pointed at and told that we are the problem. But when we look at the data and the science, that's not the case. Part of the lab that I am in, we are trying to understand why that is the case. If you have this CREBRF gene, why does it allow you to be protective, to be less likely to get type 2 diabetes? We also know that if you have this gene, you generally have higher BMI, so you look larger anyway, or in males you have higher muscle mass. So it's not so much we have a fat storing gene or that we have a gene that makes us fatter. It's more of our body composition. And I'm glad that you brought that question up, because it really annoys me in this research industry how a lot of non-Pacific people create this narrative about us, and how dare they? How dare they? Metabolic syndrome. What Pacific food diet consists of in place of Mediterranean diet? What Pacific food diet consists of? So the Mediterranean diet is an amazing diet because it has that lived experience of elders who eat these foods and have lived a long time. And it also has the scientific backing. It's had long-term studies carried understanding the effects of the Mediterranean diet. I'm just searching up that. And also the short-term benefits. Great for cardiovascular diseases, diabetes. I really love that diet. So if you want to eat, you could try a Mediterranean diet. Mainly has plant foods, fruits, vegetables, whole grains, nuts, seeds, healthy fats like extra virgin olive oil, seafood, lean protein, eat fish and seafood, rich in omega-3s, dairy, and also herbs and spices. I love the Mediterranean diet as a great scientifically backed and lived experience diet. Try that. But there is no Pacific food diet that has had that clinical study and research and long-term longevity. We just have the lived experience. So for now, what I'd envision a Pacific diet to be would be, depending on what you have access to, for you generally have 2 meals a day. So it'd be breakfast and dinner. In the morning, well, I mean, traditionally they had, it may have been, I don't even know if koko Samoa, but you could try like having at least a carb and a bit of fish. Definitely for dinner, you'd have some sort of carb with coconut cream and a seafood, a fish. And then, oh, my battery's running low. And then the breakfast, you could kind of, and for breakfast, you could kind of do a common, like you could do, what is it called? The sofai, like a more traditional breakfast. And you could try that. But the thing is, there is nothing out there. But what I see within my research is that whole foods is going to be really good for you. So you could just try to stick to whole foods, depending what you have access to, either here in New Zealand, and also foods that are in season. And you could try and get some island foods from the shop as well. Probably same type of hypothesis that are responsible for making people think Black people can't feel pain. Yes, oh my gosh. So much stigma around pain tolerances and a lot of generalizations that's rooted in racism. Yeah, great point. Or have pain, yeah. everyone's bodies were built for the environment they're in. Exactly. And so that's why I encourage others to really talk with their elders, talk with their family to see what was traditional for their families. Even non-Pacific families, Balangi families here in New Zealand, people in Europe, I think it's really empowering to see what your ancestors ate, because generally they're going to be a lot healthier foods, going to be whole foods, they're not going to be processed, and they're going to be, you can hopefully grow them in your backyard. And that's what I see, is that when it comes to the diet industry, it becomes very complicated. And for me to make it simple, think about what your ancestors had access to, and the environment that you're in, what do you have access to? What do you eat daily? Oh my gosh, don't what does it say, as I don't do, anyways, I try and eat at least a bit of